The prison transport ship moved slowly through the dark emptiness of space. Inside its cold metal walls, dozens of prisoners sat in small cells. They came from many different worlds. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some had skin that changed color with their emotions. But one prisoner was different from all the others. He was human. Daniel Cole sat in the corner of his cell with his back against the wall. His hands were bound in front of him by energy restraints that glowed with a soft blue light. Around his neck was a thick metal collar. This collar sent signals into his brain that made it impossible for him to speak. He had not said a single word in 47 days. The Velthari guards walked past his cell and laughed at him. The Velthari were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. They had conquered many worlds and believed themselves to be the strongest species in the galaxy. To them, humans were weak, small, unimportant. "Look at this one," said one guard to another. "He just sits there like a broken machine. I heard humans are supposed to be dangerous, but this one looks like he would cry if I raised my voice." The other guard made a sound like laughter. "Maybe he's already dead inside. The collar does that sometimes. Fries their little brains." Daniel did not look at them. He did not move. His eyes stared at the floor, empty and distant. But behind those empty eyes, his mind was still working, still watching, still waiting. In a cell across the corridor, a young alien named Desik watched the human with great interest. Desik was a Corvani, a small species with large dark eyes and thin limbs. His people were not warriors. They were scholars and traders. He had been captured for smuggling medical supplies to a human colony, and now he was going to die for it. But the human fascinated him. Desik had heard stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories. They said humans were weak compared to other species. They had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons. But they said other things too. They said humans did not know how to give up. They said humans would fight until their bodies broke, and then keep fighting with their spirits. They said there was one human, in particular, who would become a legend. They called him the Reaper. The stories said the Reaper had stood alone on a battlefield covered with the bodies of his enemies. They said he had killed so many Velthari soldiers that the ground turned gray with their blood. They said he was not a man at all, but a demon wearing human skin. Desik looked at the silent prisoner in the cell across from him. Could this broken, quiet human be that same demon? It seemed impossible. And yet there was something about the way he sat so still. Something about the way he breathed so slowly. Like he was not afraid. Like he was simply waiting for something. The ship's speakers crackled with a voice. "Attention all crew. We have received new orders from High Command. All prisoners are to be transported to the Velthari homeworld for public execution. This will serve as a reminder to all species that resistance against the Velthari Empire is death." Some of the prisoners screamed. Others cried. A few beat their fists against the walls of their cells. But Daniel Cole did not move. He did not react at all. He just kept staring at the floor with those empty eyes. Desik felt his heart sink. Public execution. They would make a show of killing them all. His family would probably be forced to watch. He lowered his head and tried not to think about it. Hours passed. The ship continued its slow journey through space. Desik could not sleep. He kept looking at the human, hoping to see some sign of life in him. But Daniel remained as still as stone. Then, without warning, an alarm began to scream throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in every corridor. The guards started running and shouting in their harsh language. Desik pressed his face against the bars of his cell and tried to understand what was happening. "Enemy ships approaching," announced the speaker system. "All crew to battle stations. This is not a drill. Enemy ships approaching. Enemy ships? Out here in the middle of nowhere?" And then Desik heard something that made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. He heard the guards screaming a word in terror. A word he recognized. Humans. Human warships. They found us. Through the small window at the end of the corridor, Desik could see bright flashes of light. Explosions. Ships burning in the darkness of space. The Valkyrie escort vessels were being torn apart like paper in a storm. The prison transport shook violently as something hit its hull. Prisoners fell to the floors of their cells. Lights flickered. The alarm grew louder. But through all of this chaos, Desik noticed something strange. He looked at the human in the cell across from him. For the first time in all the hours he had watched him, Daniel Cole was moving. The human had lifted his head. He was looking at the window, and on his face, barely visible in the flashing red lights, was the smallest hint of a smile. It was not a happy smile. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for something, and that something had finally arrived. Desik felt a chill run down his spine. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that this man was not broken at all. He had never been broken. He had been waiting, planning, hoping that the ship shook again. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion ripped through metal and flesh. The guards were screaming, running, dying, and Daniel Cole sat in his cell with that terrible little smile on his face, his eyes no longer empty. They were alive now, burning with something that Desik could not name. The Corvani scholar realized he was looking at the most dangerous creature he had ever seen. And somehow, against all logic, that creature was humanity's best hope. Another explosion. Closer this time. The lights went out completely, leaving only the red emergency glow. In the darkness, Desik heard the human speak for the first time. Just one word. One single word, whispered so quietly that no one else could hear it. Finally. The ship was dying. Desik could feel it in the way the floor trembled beneath him. He could hear it in the groaning of metal walls being torn apart by weapons fire. The human rescue fleet had come out of nowhere, and now the Valkyrie prison transport was being ripped to pieces. Emergency lights painted everything in a bloody red glow. Alarms screamed without end. And through the chaos, Desik watched as the guards abandoned their posts and ran toward the escape pods. They did not care about the prisoners. They only cared about saving themselves. The air was getting thin. Desik could feel it. Somewhere on the ship, the hull had been broken open, and the precious oxygen was leaking out into the cold emptiness of space. If he stayed in this cell, he would suffocate. He would die alone in a metal box far from home. But Desik was a Corvani, and his people were clever. Before the guards had taken him prisoner, he had hidden a small tool inside his body. It was a lockpick made of organic material that did not show up on scanners. He had been saving it for the right moment. This was that moment. With shaking hands, Desik pulled the tool from beneath the skin of his arm. It hurt. The pain did not matter now. Only survival mattered. He worked on the lock of his cell for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. And then, with a soft click, the door swung open. Desik stepped out into the corridor. Bodies lay everywhere. Some were guards. Some were prisoners who had died when their cells lost air. The smell of death was thick and terrible. He looked across the corridor at the human cell. Daniel Cole was still sitting in the same position, but his eyes were now fixed on Desik. Those eyes were sharp and clear. They missed nothing. Desik walked toward the cell on legs that felt weak and unsteady. He did not know why he was doing this. The smart thing would be to find an escape pod and leave. But something pulled him toward the silent human. Some feeling he could not explain. He stood in front of the cell and looked at the man inside. Up close, he could see scars on the human's face and arms. Old wounds that had healed badly. This man had been hurt many times. This man had suffered. "I have heard stories," Desik said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stories about a human soldier who became a legend. They say he killed thousands on a planet called Vega 7. They say he walked through fire and blood and did not fall. They say the Veltari gave him a name they speak only in fear." Daniel Cole said nothing. The collar around his neck still prevented him from speaking, but his eyes were locked on Desik's face. "Are you him?" Desik asked. "Are you the one they call the Reaper?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ship shook again, and a shower of sparks rained down from the ceiling. Some of those sparks hit the collar around Daniel's neck. The device made a strange sound, like electricity crying out in pain. Then it went dark and fell from his neck in two pieces. Daniel Cole opened his mouth. His throat moved. And for the first time in 47 days, he spoke. "Get these restraints off me." His voice was rough and broken, like rocks grinding together. It was the voice of a man who had screamed himself silent and then been forced to stay that way. "Get them off, and I will show you exactly who I am." Desik's hands were shaking so badly he could barely use the lockpick. But he managed. The energy restraints flickered and died. The blue light faded. And Daniel Cole, the Reaper of Vega 7, slowly rose to his feet. He was not a large man. He was average height, average build. There was nothing special about his body. But the way he stood made Desik want to run away and hide. There was a power in him that had nothing to do with muscles or size. It was something deeper. Something more dangerous. Daniel stretched his arms and rolled his neck. Bones cracked. Muscles loosened. He took a deep breath in the thin air and let it out slowly. "The rescue fleet," he said. "They will try to board this ship and save the prisoners. But the Veltari will kill everyone before they let that happen. We need to reach the communications room and signal our people." "We?" Desik repeated. Daniel looked at him. For just a moment, something soft passed through his eyes. Something almost like kindness. "You freed me. That makes you my responsibility now. Stay behind me. Do exactly what I tell you. And do not look away from what I am about to do." "Why not?" Daniel walked to the body of a dead guard and took the weapon from his belt. He checked it with practiced hands. His movements were smooth and precise, like a machine built for one purpose. "Because I want you to understand," he said quietly. "I want you to see the truth. The Reaper is not just a story. He's not just a legend. He's what humans become when everything they love is threatened. He's what we are capable of when we have nothing left to lose." He turned toward the corridor that led deeper into the ship, toward the sounds of screaming and gunfire, toward death. "Stay close," he said. "And if you believe in any gods, now would be a good time to pray." Desik followed him. He did not know why. He did not understand what force was driving him. But he followed the Reaper into the darkness. The emergency lights cast Daniel's shadow across the walls. It stretched and twisted with each flicker, making him look like something from a nightmare, something that did not belong in the world of the living. Behind him, an explosion ripped through the ship. Ahead of them, Veltari soldiers waited with weapons ready, and Daniel Cole walked forward without fear, without hesitation, without mercy. The Reaper had returned. The first Veltari guard died before he even knew Daniel was there. One moment, he was standing in the corridor with his weapon raised. The next moment, he was on the floor with his neck bent at an impossible angle. Daniel had moved so fast that Desik's eyes could not follow him. The second guard managed to fire his weapon. The energy blast burned through the air where Daniel had been standing half a second earlier. But Daniel was no longer there. He was behind the guard now, and he drove his elbow into the base of the creature's skull with terrible force. 4 more guards came, running around the corner. They saw their dead friends on the floor. They saw the humans standing among the bodies. And for just one moment, they froze. That moment was all Daniel needed. He took the weapon from the second guard's hand and fired twice. 2 guards fell. Then he threw the weapon at the third guard's face. And while the creature was blinded by surprise, Daniel closed the distance between them. He grabbed the guard's own knife and used it to end him. The last guard turned to run. Daniel caught him in 3 steps. The fight was over in less than 30 seconds. Desik stood frozen at the end of the corridor. His large dark eyes were wide with shock. He had never seen anything like this. He had never imagined that any living creature could move with such speed and precision. The human had killed 6 trained Velthari soldiers like they were nothing. Like they were insects. "Come," Daniel said. His voice was calm. His breathing was steady. "There will be more." They moved through the ship like ghosts. Daniel led the way, always checking corners, always listening for sounds of danger. Desik followed close behind, trying to make himself as small as possible. They found a group of prisoners being held in a large room. A dozen Velthari guards stood over them with weapons drawn. One of the guards was shouting orders to begin executions. The prisoners were crying and begging for their lives. Daniel did not hesitate. He walked into the room like he was taking a morning stroll. The guards saw him and raised their weapons. But by then, it was already too late. What happened next was something Desik would never forget. Daniel moved through the guards like wind through leaves. He used their own weapons against them. He used their own bodies as shields. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. He was a storm made of fists and fury. When it was over, 12 guards lay dead or dying on the floor. Daniel stood in the center of the room without a single wound on his body. The prisoners stared at him in disbelief. One of them, a human woman with short brown hair and tired eyes, slowly got to her feet. She was wearing the torn uniform of a medical officer. Her hands were shaking as she looked at Daniel's face. "That is impossible," she whispered. "You are dead. They told us you were dead. Command held a funeral." Daniel looked at her. They were wrong. Commander Cole. Tears were running down her face now. "Commander Daniel Cole, the Reaper of Vega 7. I treated wounded soldiers at that battle. I heard the stories. I thought they were just stories. What is your name?" Daniel asked. Lavra Bennett. I was a doctor on the colony ship Mercy. The Velthari captured us 6 months ago." Daniel nodded. "Can you walk?" "Yes, then walk with us. We are going to the communications room. We need to signal the rescue fleet so they can board this ship safely." Lavra wiped her eyes and stood straighter. "What about the other prisoners?" Daniel looked at the aliens who had been saved from execution. They were from many different species. Some were injured. Some were too weak to move. But all of them were looking at him with something like hope in their eyes. "Those who can walk will come with us," Daniel said. "Those who cannot will stay here. Dr. Bennett, do what you can for them. We will send help when we reach the communications room." They moved on. Their group was larger now. 15 people following one man through the broken corridors of a dying ship. Desik walked beside Laura as she told him more about the Reaper in quick. Hushed whispers. She told him about Vega 7, about the colony of 50,000 civilians that the Velthari had attacked without warning, about the 200 human soldiers who had stayed behind to protect the evacuation ships, about how they had held the line for 11 days against 15,000 enemy troops. 9,000 Velthari died in that battle, Laura said. 9,000. And then when the reinforcements finally came, they found only one human still alive, standing on a hill of bodies, covered in blood that was not his own. Desik looked at Daniel walking ahead of them. The human did not look like a monster. He looked tired, sad, Old beyond his years, they came upon a wounded Velthari guard lying against a wall. The creature was bleeding badly. It would die soon. But when it saw Daniel, it raised a shaking hand in surrender. "Please," it gasped. "Please do not kill me. I do not want to die." Daniel stopped. He looked down at the wounded guard for a long moment. Then he turned and kept walking. Desik hurried to catch up with him. "Why did you spare that one? After everything they have done to you?" Daniel did not look at him. He stopped fighting. He asked for mercy. "I kill soldiers who are trying to kill me and the people I protect. I do not kill helpless creatures who beg for their lives. But you are the Reaper. The stories say you show no mercy." Daniel finally looked at him. His eyes were heavy with something that might have been grief. "The stories are wrong about many things. I am not a monster, Desik. I am just a man who is very good at ending those who are." They reached the communications room. The door was sealed, and behind that door, Desik could hear voices. Many voices, and they did not sound friendly. Daniel checked his weapon. It was almost out of power. He looked at the door, then at the people behind him. "Stay here," he said. "All of you. No matter what you hear, do not come inside until I call for you." He opened the door and walked through, and Hell followed with him. The communications room was large and full of equipment. Screens covered the walls, showing images of the battle outside. Human ships were tearing through the Velthari fleet like fire through dry grass. Victory was close. But inside this room, death was even closer. Commander Vorath stood in the center of the room. He was a Velthari officer with scars across his gray face and hate burning in his 4 eyes. Around him stood 12 elite soldiers, the best fighters on the ship. And in Vorith's hand was a small device with a single red button. "Do not move, human," Vorith said. His voice was cold and sharp like broken glass. "This device is connected to the ship's power core. If I press this button, every living thing on this ship dies. Including you. Including me. Including all those prisoners you are trying to save." Daniel stopped in the doorway. He had taken 2 weapons from the guards outside, but he did not raise them. He simply looked at Vorath with those calm, terrible eyes. "You know who I am," Daniel said. It was not a question. "Yes." Vorath's voice shook with emotion. "I know exactly who you are, Reaper. I have been hunting you for 2 years. Ever since you murdered my brother on Vega 7. Your brother was a soldier in an army that attacked civilians. He died in battle. That is not murder. That is war. He was my blood." Vorath screamed. "He was the only family I had left, and you killed him along with 9,000 others. You stood on their bodies and smiled." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I never smiled. I have never smiled on any battlefield. What happened on Vega 7 was not something to smile about. It was something to weep over. Lies. Human lies. No." Daniel's voice was quiet but strong. "Let me tell you the truth about Vega 7, Commander. Let me tell you what really happened on that day." He took a step forward. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Vorath held up a hand to stop them. "Speak then," Vorath said. "Tell me your lies before I kill you." Daniel took a breath. Vega 7 was a farming colony. 50,000 people. Families, children, old people who had come to spend their final years in peace. They had no military value. They had no strategic importance. Your empire attacked them simply to send a message. They were humans. That was reason enough. When the attack began, we had only 200 soldiers to defend the entire colony. 200 against 15,000. We knew we could not win. We knew we were going to die. But we also knew that if we could hold the line long enough, the evacuation ships could escape. Daniel took another step forward. So we held. For 11 days we held. Every hour we survived was another ship full of families reaching safety. Every minute we fought was another child who got to live. Vareth's hand was trembling on the device. My brother died on the third day. I know. I killed him myself. Daniel's voice held no pride, no satisfaction, only a deep and heavy sadness. He was leading a charge toward the civilian shelters. If he had reached them, he would have killed everyone inside. Women, children, babies in their mother's arms. I stopped him. I would stop him again if I had to. He was following orders. That does not make it right. Daniel took another step. He was closer to Vareth now, close enough to see the tears forming in the commander's eyes. Your brother died trying to murder innocent people. I feel sorry for your loss. I feel sorry that you loved someone who did terrible things. But I will not apologize for saving those lives. The room was silent except for the distant sounds of battle. Vareth stared at Daniel with a mixture of hate and something else. Something that might have been doubt. You are lying, Vareth whispered. But his voice had lost its strength. You know I am not. Daniel took one more step. He was within arm's reach of Vareth now. If you truly wanted to kill us all, you would have pressed that button the moment I walked through the door. You want revenge, but you do not want to die. Not really. You want to live. You want to find some peace with what happened. There is no peace. Not for me. There can be. Daniel slowly reached out and placed his hand over Vareth's hand, over the device. Let me offer you something your brother never gave my people. A choice. You can press that button and kill us all, including yourself. Or you can let go and live. You can choose to end the cycle of death right here, right now. Vareth's whole body was shaking. Tears ran down his gray face. His fingers hovered over the button dot, and then one of his own soldiers moved. She was a young, Velthari female with dark markings on her skin. She struck Vareth from behind with the handle of her weapon. The commander fell to the ground, unconscious. The device rolled away from his hand. Daniel caught it before it hit the floor. The other soldiers stared at the female in shock. She looked at Daniel with eyes full of conflicting emotions. My clutch sister was on a refugee ship during the war, she said. A human doctor saved her life when no one else could. I joined the military because my family ordered me to. But I never forgot what that human did for us. Daniel nodded slowly. Thank you. An explosion shook the ship. The outer doors of the communications room burst open, and human Marines poured through with weapons ready. They wore heavy armor and moved with professional precision. The Velthari soldiers dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. They knew the fight was over. The Marine commander approached Daniel and snapped a sharp salute. Sir, Admiral Chun sends her regards. She says to tell you, welcome back from the dead. Daniel did not return the salute. He was looking at the door where Thesek and the others were slowly entering the room. What happens to the alien prisoners? Daniel asked. The Marine commander paused. Standard protocol. Detention until we can process them and decide who gets sent where. No. Daniel's voice was firm. The Corvani who freed me. His name is Thesek. He saved my life. He comes with me. The commander hesitated, but then nodded. Yes, sir. Whatever you say, sir. Daniel walked toward Thesek. The young alien looked up at him with those large, dark eyes, still filled with wonder and fear and something new. Something like admiration. You could have let me die, Thesek said quietly. You did not need to save me. I am nobody. I am not even human. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. You freed me when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That makes you one of the bravest people I have ever met. He smiled just a little. You are not nobody, Thesek. Not anymore. Outside the window, the last Velthari warship was burning. The battle was over. The prisoners were saved. The Reaper had kept his promise. 3 months had passed at rescue. Spring had come to Earth, and the cherry trees were blooming in the gardens of the North American Memorial Hospital. Pink petals drifted through the air like gentle snow. It was a peaceful day in a world that was finally learning what peace meant. Daniel Cole sat on a bench in the hospital garden, watching the petals fall. He was wearing civilian clothes now. Simple pants and a simple shirt. No uniform. No medals. No weapons. He looked like an ordinary man enjoying a quiet afternoon. But he was not ordinary. He would never be ordinary again. The military had offered him everything. A promotion to admiral. Command of an entire fleet. A position on the War Council that decided the fate of humanity. He had refused all of it. Instead, he had asked for one thing, an honorable discharge. Permission to stop being a soldier. They had given it to him, though they did not understand why. How could they? They had never stood on a hill of bodies. They had never watched friends die one by one until they were the only one left. They had never carried the weight of being called a legend when all they wanted was to be forgotten. Laura Bennett walked across the garden toward him. She was wearing her doctor's coat, but her face was relaxed and happy. She had returned to medical work at this hospital, helping to rehabilitate former prisoners of war. It was good work. Healing work. The kind of work that made the universe a little bit better. He is asking for you again, Laura said, sitting down beside Daniel. Desic? Who else? That young alien has become more popular than any of us ever expected. The news networks call him the liberator of the Reaper. He has received more interview requests than he can count. Daniel smiled slightly. How is he handling it? Not well. He hides in his room most days. He does not understand why people treat him like he is special. He keeps saying he only did what seemed right. That is exactly what makes him special. Laura looked at him with soft eyes. You know, you could help him. You could talk to him. He looks up to you more than anyone. Daniel nodded slowly. I will go see him. He found Desic in a small room on the 3rd floor of the hospital. The young Corvani was sitting by the window, staring out at the city below. Earth's buildings stretched toward the sky like silver fingers reaching for the sun. To someone who had grown up on a small trading ship, it must have been an amazing sight. They want me to give a speech, Desic said without turning around. At the peace ceremony next week. They want me to stand in front of thousands of people and talk about what happened on the prison ship. Daniel sat down in a chair nearby. And you do not want to? I do not know what to say. I am not a hero. I was just scared. I freed you because I thought you might be able to save me. That is not bravery. That is selfishness, is it? Daniel leaned forward. Tell me something, Desic. When you freed me, did you know I could save you? Did you have any proof that I was the Reaper? Desic finally turned to look at him. No, I only had a feeling. A hope. So you acted on hope alone. You took a risk that could have gotten you killed. You trusted a stranger in the darkest moment of your life. Daniel smiled. That is not selfishness. That is faith. That is courage. But I was afraid. Every brave person is afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and acting anyway because you know it is the right thing to do. Desic was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, what will you do now? Now that the war is ending? The news had come just 2 days ago. The Velthari government had requested peace talks for the first time in 30 years. The war that had claimed millions of lives was finally coming to an end. Humans and Velthari would soon sit at the same table and try to build a future together. I do not know, Daniel admitted. For so long, fighting was all I knew. Now I have to learn how to live again. How to be more than just a weapon. You were never just a weapon. I saw you on that ship. You could have killed the wounded guard, but you did not. You could have left the alien prisoners behind, but you saved them. You showed mercy when no one would have blamed you for showing none. Daniel looked at his hands. Hands that had taken so many lives. Hands that still trembled sometimes in the night when the memories came flooding back. I hope you are right, he said quietly. I hope there is more to me than blood and death. The next day, Daniel went to the memorial of Vega 7. It was a wall of white stone with 200 names carved into its surface. 200 soldiers who had given their lives so that others could live. His friends, his brothers and sisters in arms, the people he had failed to save. He brought flowers, simple white roses. He placed them at the base of the wall and then stood in silence, reading each name. He spoke them aloud, one by one, the way he did every year on the anniversary of the battle. It took a long time. He did not rush stop when he finished. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Desik standing there, looking uncertain. Lover told me where to find you, the Corvani said. I hope I am not disturbing you. No, come, stand with me. Desik walked forward and stood beside Daniel. Together, they looked at the wall of names. These were my friends, Daniel said. They trusted me to lead them. They followed me into a battle we could not win because they believed in something larger than themselves. They were the real heroes. I just happened to be the one who survived. The galaxy calls you a legend. The galaxy is wrong. Daniel turned to look at Desik. Legends are stories people tell to make sense of things they cannot understand. I am not a story. I am just a man. A tired, broken man who wants to rest. So rest. Desik reached out and touched Daniel's arm. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. You have done enough. You have saved enough lives. You have carried enough weight. Let others carry it now. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and painful for years. He took a deep breath of the spring air and let it out slowly. Thank you, Desik. For what? For reminding me that I am allowed to be human. They stood together at the memorial as the sun began to set. The sky turned orange and pink, like the cherry blossoms in the hospital garden. Somewhere in the distance, children were laughing. Life was continuing. The universe was healing. What should I call you now? Desik asked. The Reaper seems wrong. Commander Cole seems too formal. Daniel smiled. A real smile this time. Full and warm and free of shadows. Call me Daniel. That is who I was before all of this. That is who I want to be again. They walked away from the memorial together. A human and an alien. Two survivors of a war that had nearly destroyed them both. They did not know what the future would bring. They did not know if the peace would last. But they knew one thing for certain. They were no longer alone. And sometimes that is enough.